Before I start my topic, I want to make it quite clear that a white nationalist or a white supremacist doesn't want anything to do with black people, doesn't want black people working for them, doesn't want to be around black people, just despises black people, especially back then. That's what you have to understand.
You have worse integration problems in the North than they have in the South.
Now, I want to talk about the political climate in the antebellum period, specifically the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, the Republicans, they're going to tell you that they were formed in the North and they were about getting rid of slavery. And the Democrats were in the South and they were all about slavery. Now, that is not the case at all. The Democrats were notoriously racist and bigoted towards black people. Now, racist, bigoted people like that, they don't like being around black people. That's why there was de facto segregation in the North. Even before the Civil War, it was like that for quite some time. And there was no law, and it was just the attitude, and they did not want to be around black people. Now, there were some Democrats that were slaveholders. Yes, that was a tiny minority. But overall, they were about freedom, the Democrats. And the reason why they endorsed slavery is because they wanted the West for themselves. They wanted the West to be all white. So the slavery kept black people in a bubble. And also de facto segregation in the North kept black people in the bubble as well. And they made it quite clear that they wanted the West for themselves. So along comes Abraham Lincoln, the Republican Party, and they basically say that, okay, we're not going to expand slavery into the territories. We're not going to do that. And we're not going to support, and we're going to maintain slavery where it exists. And it's like perfect, because if you pop that bubble, then all of a sudden slaves or black people could go anywhere. You understand? It'll set a precedent and black people go everywhere, and that's not what they wanted. That's why Democrats supported slavery, even though they weren't about slavery. Some of them, yes. And most likely, if a Democrat was a slaveholder, he treated black people very badly, because the Southerners, they would tell you that, yes, some slaves are treated very badly, but overall, no, that's not the case. But we notice that the North is telling the story, so they like to say all these nasty things about black culture. You notice that? So they said all these nasty things about slavery. They also said that black people are inferior, black people have no history to speak of. So it's like, well, if you believe what they say about slavery, then you must believe what they say about the inferiority of black people, and also that black people have no history. So you cannot choose that, no, they're actually lying about black people having no history, but they're telling the truth about slavery. Like, no, that's not the case. They're lying about everything about black culture. They just don't like black culture. So for them to be in the South and ruling over black people and having black workers, that is not what a white supremacist does. That's not what a white supremacist is about. White supremacists were in the North, not the South. They didn't like being around black people. That's why they had de facto segregation, and they wanted the West for themselves. That's why they wanted to maintain slavery in the South, because it kept black people in the bubble, and it kept black people in the bubble with de facto segregation. They wanted the West for themselves, all white. That's what you have to understand. Now, once I say that, then you're going to think that, well, that means that the Democrats voted for Lincoln in the North. And the reason why they say that, oh, the Southerners didn't vote for Lincoln is because that was their guy. That was their guy. The Republicans were about slavery because the Constitution it had slave language in it. Obviously, because you had the 13th Amendment in order to get rid of it, because there was slave language in the Constitution. The Republicans were about slavery. And after the Civil War, they instituted the Black Codes. The Republicans were in charge of the South. They instituted the Black Codes. And a whole bunch of black people got into positions of power in the South because they didn't have a problem with black and white people working together. Okay, people who would visit the North and the South, they would see that the race relations between the North and the South are far better in the South than they are in the North. So that's not surprising. But if you're going to say that the Republicans were based in the North, well, okay, then how come they didn't have a whole bunch of black people that got into positions of power in the South, in the North? It's because the Democrats were ruling the North. That's why. The Republicans were ruling the South. So yeah, they're going to uplift black people. They were about lift because it was the black Republicans. The black Republicans were hugely responsible for the Constitution. That's why they're manipulating the history to make it seem that, oh, the Democrats were mainly based in the South and the Republicans were based in the North. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. They actually picked Lincoln. The reason why the Democrats picked Lincoln because he was about limiting the slavery in the territories and maintaining slavery in the South. That's perfect for them because they wanted the West for themselves. They wanted the West to be all white territory, so it was perfect. Okay, the other people like what's his name, Stephen Douglas, he was talking about popular sovereignty. Oh, that was a disaster. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, that was a disaster. And then there's John Breckinridge. He supported a federal slave code which protects slaveholders in the territories. The Northerners didn't like that, and also he supported popular sovereignty. They didn't like that. Okay, so the Democrats are not going to vote for him, and they say, if you look at the 1860 election, they say that the Democrats actually voted for John Breckinridge. If you understand the attitudes of the Northerners or Democrats, they wouldn't vote for him. They wanted the West for themselves. The Democrats were notoriously racist. They wanted the West for themselves. Okay, and the other guy, John Bell, he was a constitutional union. He wanted to avoid the slavery issue and keep the country united. But he doesn't say anything about, like, well, are you going to allow, you know, slaves in the territory? He didn't say anything about that, so they didn't want to deal with him. But Lincoln was saying everything that they wanted to hear, so which is why they voted for him. But that was the Northerners, which were Democrats. But they're going to tell you that no, it was the Republicans that were in the North. Like, no, they weren't. As the Republicans were in the North, how come a whole bunch of black people in the South got into positions of power? How come the people in the North, the Republicans in the North, if they were in the North, how come the black people weren't getting into positions of power? It's because the Democrats were controlling the North. They're totally lying to you. And black people were a huge part of the Constitution. That's what they're not telling you. And it's a shame, but like if you understand what I'm saying to you and you know I'm right, then they're hiding something majorly. And it's really a shame, but it's not surprising because everything is done to hide black people's culture and our history.